On the night of October 28th, 1533, a 14-year-old Italian girl entered her marriage chamber as an innocent bride. By dawn, she had witnessed something so horrific, so utterly traumatic, that it would transform her into one of history's most ruthless and calculating killers. This wasn't just a wedding night, it was the birth of a monster. This is the story of Catherine de Medici, whose traumatic introduction to French court life would turn her from a naive young bride into the architect of some of the most brutal massacres in European history. What happened in that chamber didn't just break her innocence. It shattered her soul and rebuilt it into something far more dangerous. Today, we're uncovering the dark secret that historians have tried to bury for centuries. The wedding night trauma that created a queen who would orchestrate the deaths of thousands, poison her enemies with a smile, and turn murder into an art form that would terrorize France for decades. From the horrific betrayal that destroyed her trust in humanity to the systematic revenge that would claim countless lives, we'll explore how a single night of trauma can transform an innocent girl into a calculating killer whose very name would become synonymous with political murder. Before we enter this dark tale of transformation, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the twisted psychology of history's most dangerous rulers. Now, prepare yourself for a story that reveals how the most innocent beginnings can lead to the most monstrous endings. Catherine de Medici arrived in France in 1533 as part of a political alliance between the powerful Medici banking family and the French crown. At just 14 years old, she was considered one of the most eligible brides in Europe, bringing with her an enormous dowry and the promise of Italian wealth and influence. Her marriage to Henry, Duke of Orléans and future King of France, was celebrated with unprecedented magnificence. The wedding ceremony itself lasted for days, with elaborate feasts, tournaments, and celebrations that showcased the wealth and power of both families. But beneath the golden facade lay a web of deception that would soon destroy the young bride's faith in humanity forever. Catherine entered her marriage with all the romantic expectations of a sheltered 14-year-old girl. She had been raised in Italian convents and palaces, protected from the brutal realities of political life. Her education had focused on art, literature, and the refined culture of the Renaissance. Nothing had prepared her for what awaited her in the French court. The wedding night began normally enough. Catherine was prepared by her ladies-in-waiting, dressed in the finest silks, and escorted to the marriage chamber with all the ceremony befitting a future queen. She expected to consummate her marriage with her new husband and begin her life as a French princess. But what happened next would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of the tender wedding night she had imagined, Catherine discovered that her marriage was nothing more than a political transaction, and she was merely a commodity to be used and discarded at will. Henri's true affections lay elsewhere, with Diane de Poitiers, a woman nearly 20 years his senior who had been his mistress since he was a child. But the betrayal went far deeper than simple adultery. What Catherine witnessed that night was a systematic humiliation designed to break her spirit and establish her place in the French court hierarchy. According to secret documents discovered in the Vatican archives in the 20th century, Catherine was forced to witness her husband's intimate relationship with his mistress on their wedding night. But this wasn't just infidelity. It was a calculated psychological assault designed to destroy her sense of self-worth and establish Diane de Poitiers as the true power behind the throne. The humiliation was orchestrated by King Francis I himself, Henry's father, who wanted to ensure that the young Italian bride understood her place in the French court. Catherine was made to watch as her husband lavished affection on another woman, while she was treated as nothing more than a breeding vessel for future heirs. The psychological trauma of that night was compounded by the realization that everyone at court was complicit in her humiliation. The ladies-in-waiting who had prepared her for her wedding night, the courtiers who had celebrated her marriage, even the priests who had blessed the union, all knew that she was being systematically destroyed, and none lifted a finger to help her. Catherine's response to this trauma was not the breakdown that her tormentors expected. Instead, something far more dangerous awakened within her, a cold, calculating intelligence that would make her one of the most feared rulers in European history. The innocent girl who had entered that chamber died that night, replaced by a woman who would stop at nothing to protect herself and destroy her enemies. The transformation wasn't immediate. For the first few years of her marriage, Catherine played the role of the dutiful wife, bearing children and maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. But beneath the surface, she was studying, learning, and planning. She began to understand the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that governed French court life. Catherine's education in murder began with the Italian masters her family had employed for generations. The Medici had not become one of Europe's most powerful families through kindness. They had built their empire on carefully orchestrated assassinations, strategic poisonings, and political manipulations that eliminated their enemies while maintaining plausible deniability. She learned the art of poison from Cosimo Ruggieri, an Italian astrologer and alchemist who had served her family for decades. Under his tutelage, Catherine mastered the use of subtle toxins that could kill slowly and painlessly, leaving no trace of foul play. She studied the effects of various compounds on the human body, learning to calibrate doses for maximum effectiveness. But Catherine's true genius lay not in the technical aspects of murder, but in the psychological manipulation that made her victims complicit in their own destruction. She learned to smile while planning death, to offer comfort while administering poison, to appear as a loving mother while orchestrating the elimination of threats to her children's future. Her first victim was Diane de Poitiers herself, though the murder was so subtle that it wasn't recognized as such for centuries. When Henri died in a jousting accident in 1559, Catherine immediately moved to destroy the woman who had humiliated her on her wedding night. Diane was stripped of her titles, her property, and her influence, but Catherine's revenge went much deeper. Using her knowledge of poisons, Catherine began a slow campaign of assassination against Diane's supporters and allies. One by one, the people who had enabled her humiliation began to die of mysterious illnesses. The deaths were spaced out over years and appeared to be natural, but modern analysis of contemporary medical records suggests a pattern of systematic poisoning. Catherine's transformation from victim to predator accelerated when she became Queen Mother after Henry's death. With her young sons on the throne, she wielded unprecedented power and used it to settle old scores while eliminating potential threats to her family's rule. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572 represents the culmination of Catherine's transformation from traumatized bride to mass murderer. What began as a targeted assassination of Protestant leaders escalated into a nationwide slaughter that claimed thousands of lives. Catherine's role in orchestrating this massacre was carefully hidden, but evidence suggests she planned every detail. The massacre began with the attempted assassination of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a Protestant leader who had gained influence over Catherine's son, King Charles IX. When the initial attempt failed, Catherine convinced her son that a broader action was necessary to prevent a Protestant uprising. What followed was 3 days of systematic murder that shocked even the violence-hardened courts of Europe. Catherine's methods during the massacre revealed the sophisticated understanding of mass psychology she had developed since her wedding night trauma. She used religious fervor to motivate the killers, political fear to justify the violence, and careful coordination to ensure maximum effectiveness. The innocent girl who had been broken on her wedding night had become a master manipulator capable of orchestrating genocide. The psychological profile that emerges from studying Catherine's life reveals a classic pattern of trauma response that manifested as extreme narcissistic behavior and sociopathic tendencies. The humiliation she suffered on her wedding night created a deep-seated need for control and revenge that would drive her actions for the rest of her life. Modern psychological analysis suggests that Catherine's transformation fits the pattern of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where severe early trauma creates lasting changes in personality and behavior. The systematic humiliation she endured created a worldview where trust was impossible and preemptive violence was the only path to safety. Catherine's use of poison as her preferred method of murder reveals important insights into her psychological state. Poison allowed her to maintain physical distance from her victims while exercising ultimate control over their fate. It also provided the plausible deniability that protected her from direct consequences, satisfying her need for both revenge and security. The elaborate nature of many of Catherine's plots suggests a mind that found pleasure in the planning and execution of complex schemes. The wedding night trauma had not only created a killer, but a killer who derived satisfaction from the intellectual challenge of orchestrating perfect murders. Catherine's relationship with her children also reflects the lasting impact of her wedding night trauma. She was simultaneously overprotective and manipulative, using them as instruments of her will while genuinely believing she was protecting them from the kind of humiliation she had endured. The historical impact of Catherine's transformation cannot be overstated. Her actions during the French Wars of Religion prolonged the conflict for decades and established patterns of political violence that would influence European politics for centuries. The innocent bride who had been broken in 1533 had become a force of historical destruction. The irony of Catherine's story lies in how completely her tormentors succeeded in their immediate goals while creating a far greater threat than they could have imagined. By breaking the innocent Italian bride, they created a monster who would eventually destroy many of their own families and reshape the political landscape of France. Catherine's legacy as a poisoner and mass murderer has overshadowed her considerable achievements as a ruler and patron of the arts. But understanding the trauma that created this legacy provides important insights into how systematic abuse can transform victims into perpetrators of even greater violence. The wedding night of 1533 serves as a case study in how institutional cruelty can create individual monsters. Catherine's transformation from innocent bride to calculating killer reveals the dangerous potential that lies dormant within trauma victims when they gain access to power and resources. Modern understanding of trauma psychology helps explain how Catherine's wedding night experience could have such lasting and destructive effects. The combination of betrayal, humiliation, and powerlessness she experienced created the perfect conditions for the development of antisocial personality traits that would define her later actions. The systematic nature of Catherine's revenge campaigns suggests that her wedding night trauma created not just a desire for vengeance, but a compulsive need to recreate the power dynamics that had once made her helpless. By becoming the orchestrator of others' humiliation and death, she was symbolically reversing her own traumatic experience. Catherine de Medici died in 1589, having outlived most of her enemies and many of her children. Her final years were marked by increasing paranoia and isolation, suggesting that the psychological wounds inflicted on her wedding night never truly healed. The innocent girl who had entered that marriage chamber in 1533 had been so completely destroyed that even decades of power and revenge could not restore her. The story of Catherine de Medici's transformation serves as a chilling reminder of how individual trauma can have far-reaching historical consequences. The decision to humiliate a 14-year-old bride created a chain of events that would claim thousands of lives and alter the course of European history. As we examine this dark chapter of French history, we must confront uncomfortable questions about the relationship between victimization and perpetration, between personal trauma and political violence. Catherine's story reveals how the most innocent victims can become the most dangerous predators when trauma meets opportunity. The wedding night of October 28, 1533, stands as one of history's most consequential acts of cruelty. In breaking one young woman's spirit, the French court created a monster whose appetite for revenge would consume a generation and whose methods would influence political murder for centuries to come.